Alrighty then, it has been a while. Let me see if I can remember how to do this thing. Oh, hang on, this isn't how we start, is it? Hello Pickles and welcome to episode 15 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as Dunderknit, and it has been a little while. I usually put out a weekly podcast. I say usually, does that term apply to someone who's only been podcasting since October? I think let's run with it. So up until the beginning of the year, I was posting a weekly podcast. In the last few weeks, I've had to make it a bi-weekly podcast because I've started a new contract with work and I just don't have the content to be able to facilitate a weekly podcast at the moment, but things I am sure they will be back on track in the not too distant future. If you're a new viewer and this is your first time finding us over here at Knitting Vicariously, a big hello and welcome to you. I hope you're well. One thing to be aware of right up front is that this is a swearing or cursing friendly podcast and therefore my languages want to get a little bit colourful. If that's not your bag, I totally understand. Thank you so much for stopping by, but yeah. That's the way it is around here, I'm afraid. So if you're a long-term viewer and you've been around since the start, since more recently, since Tuesday, a big hello and welcome back. I hope you're well. Yeah, we're in mid-January already. How on earth has that happened? Well, I say that. It's been a long month already. It's, you know, you could go either way on it, to tell the truth. But yes, the weeks, they are flying by and there's a fair bit to catch up on, if not a whole lot of knitting content to show for it. So I hope you are sitting very comfortably with a beverage and maybe a little knitting of your own. In terms of an update from my side, yes, the job has started. I'm a few weeks in and things are going pretty well. It has been a lot to take in. Things are moving fairly swiftly and there's been, a huge amount to catch up on, as of course you would expect. It's definitely been going in at the deep end. In fact, I'm not sure the deep end is kind of a fair enough analogy. It's kind of more like cliff diving, when you get to the very top and you think, my, this is a lovely view, but fuck me, that's quite a long way down and those rocks look very sharp. So it's been a challenge, but I'm enjoying it. The only downside with it all is just the extent to which it's eaten into my knitting time, between obviously not having days free anymore and evenings being spent occasionally just needing to stare at things for a bit, try and process information that's been coming into my head. Yeah, it's fair to say that my knitting hasn't progressed quite as much as I would like it to, but I will be showing you a little bit of progress on the things that I've been working on in the last couple of weeks. Fair to say though, spoiler alert, there aren't any FOs. Thank you so much to everyone who's reached out with comments, with tags, with messages saying they hope things are going well. I really do appreciate you reaching out. As well as knitting, the other thing that suffered is just the sheer amount of time I have to spend on some of the different social media platforms, whether it's Instagram, Ravelry, or even here on YouTube. So if you have left me a message and you haven't heard back from me yet, I really, really do apologise. Yeah, my time is shorter and there's a lot more sleeping that's been happening as well. So again, I really hope to be a little bit more up to speed in the not too distant future. As I've mentioned, my intention is to get back to recording on a weekly basis, but certainly in the short term, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. So I'm going to continue to record on a bi-weekly basis or fortnightly, depending on your word of choice. But a couple of you had reached out to say very sweetly and only slightly needily that you were missing the podcast, and so I thought I would take the opportunity to share with you some truly fabulous podcasts featuring truly fabulous individuals that should help you get through on the weeks when I'm not around. And frankly, if you're not already aware of them and subscribe to them already, then this is your opportunity because you are missing out, my friends. The first of those is a podcast that I really consider to be almost a kindred spirit of ours. Not least because if you have joined us previously over on the Ravelry Knitting Vicariously thread, you will know that in the introduction section you're invited to ask for your drink of choice, your beverage of choice, and that can be a soft drink or, and perhaps more often, it can be the hard stuff. And so if you don't already know about the Drunk Knitter, I urge you to please go on and stop this right this second so that you can go and check her out over on YouTube, because she's hilarious. So as her name would suggest, she is equally just delightful to sit and listen to, wonderfully talented when it comes to both what she knits and what she designs, and deeply hilarious when it comes to watching her asides, her excellent streams of consciousness and rambling. She is an absolute delight. And so if you're not already aware or catching up with Sophia on a regular basis, I highly recommend it, because she had me chuckling through much of this week. The second podcast that I have been enjoying this week is Julissa of the Quirky Monday podcast, and you can find her over on her YouTube channel, which is Nadira Tani, and I will put that here in the description box below. And Julissa's podcast is one that, you know, those people where you sit and you watch and you really enjoy spending time with them, but actually the biggest thing in all of it is that when they smile, you smile. I find myself doing this so much with Julissa. I sit, and the second she has this amazing grin that crosses her face when she gets really excited and passionate about what she's talking about, I find myself doing exactly the same. And she's such a joy to watch. She's very, very talented. Her dogs are adorable, and so if you don't already follow her, please, please, please take some time, go over and give her a little bit of love there too. I also, of course, have to mention the fabulous Gigi Made It. Gigi is just the most delightful, joyful person to watch. If you follow her on Instagram, it is worth noting that she is over on YouTube as well, and her love of orange is equally apparent. Gigi, I mean, she looks fabulous in orange, which definitely helps, and as someone who has a deep admiration for all things gold and yarn related, I can certainly empathise. So when it comes to Gigi, I have you ever had one of those moments where you're out and about, you're at in this case, a yarn festival, but you could be pretty much anywhere in any walk of life, and you see someone and you think, I know you, I'm going to wave at you like an absolute loon. And then you realise kind of partway through that wave, I mean the crucially part, once you've committed to the wave, that yeah, you don't know that person, you've seen them on the internet, but they don't know who you are, and now you're just someone who's standing, smiling and waving. Yeah, luckily I don't think she necessarily clocked I was waving at her, and it probably helped that she had no idea who I was. But yes, it was one of those interesting moments at Rhinebeck where you're like, ah, yeah, no, this is real life, and what I do the rest of the year round, not so much. But yeah, she is definitely someone who it is worth spending a little bit of time with. On the subject of knitters that I missed out on a little bit at Rhinebeck, there is also the wonderful Denise of the Earth Tones Girl podcast. Denise is someone who, again, is such a lovely and gentle, soothing podcast to watch. The projects she chooses are wonderful, her knitting is impeccable, and it's just so lovely to sit and spend a little time winding down with her and just, you know, being soothed by all of the fabulous things that she makes and the way in which she talks about them. And then last but certainly not least is someone who I am desperately hoping I have the opportunity to meet in person at EYF later on this year, and that is Mars of the Hey Brownberry podcast. She's someone who I only started watching some of her podcasts last year after, of course, EYF had already taken place, to realise that she'd come over from the US specifically for EYF. So I'm hoping to rectify that this year. But again, and very similar to kind of Denise in her manner and her way of talking around some of the things she knits, it's just such a wonderful, soothing time to spend with someone who makes something absolutely fabulous. And so, as with all of the podcasts I've mentioned, I really do hope that you find a little bit of time and maybe spend it with them this week. We do have a few bits to get through today, but one thing I wanted to mention a little bit up front is obviously now that we are into the latter part of January, we are beginning to come and approach the end of our BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG, and this has been running since the middle of November. This has been our opportunity to cast on with our trademark wild abandon all and any of the patterns that have been calling to us, or indeed the yarn that we wanted to work with that up until then had been purely vicarious. So an opportunity for you to drop everything and cast on with absolute impunity, because I am here for you to blame. You can just cast aside any fears that you have, any guilt that you have, and lay that all on me. I will take it and you will be free to cast on whatever you choose without any fear of reciprocity or judgment. And so in doing that, I hope that many of you have been able to get a little bit further along with some of the projects that you've been working on. Our FO thread has been growing apace and the chatter thread continues to rumble along. I've seen a lot of wonderful posts over on Instagram too, and in fact those are the 3 ways that you can, should you wish, enter to win a prize. Now, you don't have to finish all of the things that you're working on or any of the things that you're working on. Indeed, part of it has just been the joy of being able to cast them on in the first instance. But if you do wish to win a prize, there are one of 3 ways in which you can do that. The first of those is just by taking part in the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG chatter thread over on Ravelry. So we have the Knitting Vicariously group on Ravelry. You are more than welcome to join us over there. There will be links along with all of the show notes down in the description box below. But if you join us over there, you can chatter away to your heart's content about all things Cal related, whether it's commenting on something that someone else has been working on, or indeed just sharing some pictures of where you're up to with your own. I will be using random number generator to choose one post at random from that thread, and that winner will win one of the prizes that I'll show momentarily. Your second opportunity to win a prize is also in the Ravelry thread, but this time it is in the FO thread specifically. Unlike the chatter thread when you can post as many times as your little heart desires, in the FO thread we're asking it to be no more than 1 post per person. And if you have finished multiple objects, 1, well done you, and 2, please ensure that these are all within 1 single post. So as and when you finish extra ones, you will be editing your original post rather than creating a new one. I have messaged a couple of people this week who had accidentally added more than 1 post in there. If you haven't already fixed this, or indeed if I haven't spoken to you yet but you think you might have done the same, please do go back and check. I want to make sure that this is as fair for everyone as possible, and if you haven't done it within the next few days, I will have to delete any subsequent posts just to keep things fair. So yes, with the FO thread, as with the chatter thread, I'll be using random number generator to pick one of those at random. Also worth mentioning that the FO thread is no chatter, otherwise known as, if you do have any comments or any kind of praise that you've put in there for someone else's project, again, I'm going to have to delete them. So it is intended purely as an FO thread to showcase all of the incredible things that you've been making. And last but not least, we have the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG hashtag over on Instagram. And this is again an opportunity for you to post as many times as you wish, keeping it on topic by focusing on your projects that you're knitting or crocheting or making generally for the knit-along itself. And so if you use the hashtag on those pictures, I will then be going through and picking another entry at random using, I don't know if it'll be random number generator or if there's a tool that I can find and use on the internet somewhere that will make it a little bit easier to manage, but essentially there will be again a winner who is chosen at random for using the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG hashtag there too. But yes, all this talk of winners and not enough talk of prizes, that's what I say. So let me remind you of what the prizes are, that you are indeed in it to win it. So each of the 3 prize winners will receive a couple of goodies from my wonderful friend Sue Stratford. Sue is Knitting and Gin over on Instagram, is the designer of many fabulous toy and garment patterns, and also happens to be the genius behind a number of knitting related pins. This is one of my personal favourites. This is her sort of original Knitting and Gin pin, which you can see. She also had more recently her Whiskey and Whip pin that she shared over at Indie Untangled in the US, and also the Prosecco and Pearl pin. Not all of her pins are alcohol related, but my favourite ones are those. So just so you're aware, so you have a pin badge as well as the matching tote bag, and these tote bags are not currently available in her shop. I'm not sure if she's planning to bring them back. I will ask her and try to get a bit of an update for you all. But yes, I have one of these. I love it. I had great delight in taking it round with me at Rhinebeck last year, and received an awful lot of admiring glances and comments. So you know you found your people. But yeah, so this is one part of what you will be in it to win. One of the things that I love so much about this giveaway is the fact that I'm able to share makers with you who I've talked about here in the podcast and whose products I absolutely adore. And so the next person I want to speak about is no exception. And so one of the things that you will be winning in that prize package as well is one of these 3 different sweater size project bags from Tanny Casey. I featured the bag that I own by Tanny Casey back at the very first episode of Knitting Vicariously, and so I'm delighted to be able to share these with you. They are beautifully made, very kind of thick canvas bottomed bags with drawstrings, fully lined, and there are 3 different versions. So the first of these is this beautiful floral pattern. Similarly, one behind with a navy bottom here as well, and then last but not least you've got this amazing kind of olivey green concoction here with the little peach highlights. And again, all of these fabulously lined, stand up on their own, really substantial in size, and yeah, you get to be the proud owner. Now, there was no way that I could do a giveaway without including a little bit of yarn in there too. And again, similar to the project bags, there are 3 things here that are broadly the same but a little bit different, and so it'll be a little bit of luck as to which one you receive if you win. But I have here some skeins of yarn from the wonderful Das Mondschaf, who is an independent dyer who's based over in Germany. Sabrina was very kind in helping me put these together. So we have here the first kit, which is, you turn it up the right way around so you can see, 2 skeins of yarn, one on her Aurora base, one on her Virgo base. The Aurora base is her merino single ply fingering weights, and the Virgo is her kid silk mohair. And these are both in the colour Cerise, just the most beautiful burgundy. So that's the first option. The second option that I could not resist is this amazing bright and punchy yellow, and this is her Kill Bill colourway, again on her Aurora and Virgo bases. Oh, I love this so much. And then last but certainly by no means least is a colour that has had an awful lot of love, and this is the TARDIS colourway, again in those 2 same bases, and it is just the most beautiful, rich, tealy navy imaginable, and yeah, it's absolutely stunning. And so those are the yarns that you can win as part of this too. But as with everything here, a large part of why I want to share this is because these are makers that I adore, and so if you do want to show them a little bit of love alongside, do feel free. A couple of extra bits that I hadn't mentioned in previous weeks because I was still just making sure that we were good to go on those. The first of them is that each prize winner will also receive a pin badge from my fabulous local yarn shop, which is Tribe over in Richmond. Let me pop it up here so you can see. I love everything about this store, including Millie's branding, which is an absolute delight. And so there are 3 of these pin badges. Each winner will receive one in their kit. You will also receive a copy of my wonderful friend Kristen's design Kristen, who is Vullenvine, who of course you may well have heard of, who is also the designer of the Sparkling Cider hat. And the Sparkling Cider hat is a hat that I have knit previously. It's a hat that I was delighted enough to test knit for Kristen, and it is perfect for a single skein of fingering weight yarn and a skein of mohair lace held together. And so if you haven't already knit that, if you perhaps are looking for some inspiration to make something with your brand new newly acquired prize yarn, that might be an option for you too. So you'll be receiving a copy of that pattern in there as well. And last but by no means least, I have raved in pretty much every episode about the fabulous progress keepers I have from Hannah, who is the Corner of Craft on Instagram and on YouTube. And Hannah's progress keepers make me so happy. They are hand beaded. The time and the energy that goes into each and every one of them is just, oh, insane. But she has been so kind not only to make some progress keepers for this giveaway, but to make custom progress keepers for this giveaway. Now, the designs that we've chosen are 3 of my absolute favourites, and she made them specifically for me in Knitting Vicariously, and you may be able to see why. If I pop them up here on the screen, yeah, she's made them in gold. I'm so happy. I was so excited when she sent me this picture. They're currently winging their way to me. They're in the post. I cannot wait. And I'd say it's going to be a wrench for me to give them to you. Honestly, I'm just so excited to see them and to include them as part of these packages. Oh, Hannah, you are the greatest. These made me smile so much. And so yes, you're also going to be receiving a very, very limited edition little gold progress keeper of your very own to work with and to keep you happy as you knit along. And so there you have it. If you needed any additional incentive to keep chatting, to keep posting with the hashtag, or to get your things finished and posted over on Ravelry, then I hope that that has given you the little nudge that you needed, because I have been so delighted to see this Cal and see your responses to it and see you use it as a fabulous opportunity to cast on the things that you've been lusting after for a while. I'm delighted to be able to be sharing a little bit of love back with you as well. And so, without any further ado, let's get into it, shall we? So, as ever, you'll be able to find show notes for this week's episode in the description box below, as well as over on Ravelry in the Knitting Vicariously podcast group. As ever, you can find us by searching for Knitting Vicariously in the groups tab on Ravelry. You can also find show notes over on the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account. This is an Instagram account that I have set up solely to publish when podcasts are out and to link to makers and any relevant hashtags that I might mention over the course of the episode itself. So if you do want to be able to easily find some of the makers that are mentioned or follow along with us there, that is a good account to follow. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at what it is that I happen to be wearing, as well as talking around some of the works in progress that I've been working on in the last couple of weeks, which are almost but not exclusively knitting and crocheting related in some form or another. That'll become clearer as we get to it. And then towards the end, we will be focusing on some of the things you have been working on for the knit along with our now traditional calorie. And so yes, I'm looking forward to chatting about them with you. But without any further ado, let me introduce you to one of my very oldest and very first garment knits in the shape of the Julissa sweater. Here we have it. This is a pattern by Vanessa Smith. I will put her original picture up here on the side so you can admire it. It is a wonderful jumper pattern. It is top down, it is raglan, and it has this beautiful panel down the front that I will show you in a little bit more detail momentarily. I knit this jumper 6 years ago this month. And that's a little bit baffling to me. I finished this in January 2013. I started it in December 2012. Remember the heady days of 2012? Yeah, it's it's amazing that it's from that long ago. And I will say that I was quite a bit smaller when I knit this and it fitted rather differently, but that's not to say it doesn't fit in a way that I'm still pretty happy with today. So first things first, let me stand up and give you a little show. Here you have it. This is the Julissa sweater. It has this incredible panel down the front, which is a beautiful braid cable with some lace work on either side. It has, again, a lovely rope braid down each of the sleeves, and as I mentioned, it is raglan shaped. So, oops, let me tuck that under there. You can see that it has got a little bit of a boat neck, oops, let me move my hair, little bit of a boat neck neckline. It has this beautiful raglan shaping underneath all of the rib. The rib has been designed fabulously so that it feeds nicely into the cables, which is one of the details that I adore about this sweater. And yes, I am wearing a cami underneath for purposes of dignity and just general, you know, fashion and warmth, actually, as much as anything else. So you will need to excuse the fact that you can see a little bit of my chest through there, but yes, it is a really, really lovely pattern. It is, as ever, pretty much bang on my mid-hip length, and if I turn round, you will see that it is plain on the back. Really, really lovely sweater. Let me sit down and tell you a little bit more about it. So yes, this is a wonderful sweater pattern. I can't remember, I feel like I knit this as part of a knit along way back when, but I can't remember for the life of me exactly what it was. I think it may have been in a Madeline Tosh group for reasons that are inevitable. I think there was a knit along that was ongoing that I knit this as part of, and I can't remember if I finished it in time or whatever it may have been, but ultimately that yes, I decided that I was going to try and knit a sweater. Now I think prior to that I cast on a couple of sweaters but not finished them. I had knit a couple of garments that were cardigans, so I knit a sort of raglan wrap. I knit a cardigan with some lace work and some quite thick Aran weight, if not bulky weight yarn, but this is definitely the first kind of true sweater knit that I ever actually completed. Now, being as this was a very early sweater of mine, it should come as no real surprise that I knit it out of Madeline Tosh, but not DK Twist. Haha! I take it as a moral victory and then relinquish it again because it is Tosh DK, which is also, to be fair, one of her DK weight merino bases. So you know, there's not a huge amount of difference there. But Tosh DK is her retail base. It's what is found in a lot of the shops worldwide that stock Madeline Tosh, whereas DK Twist is a base that is exclusive to her online shop based out of Texas in the US. So in terms of differences between them, I think it's fair to say DK Twist is maybe a slightly tighter twist, as the name would suggest, and it maybe works up a tiny bit thicker, but to be honest, there's a lot of similarity, probably more so than there is difference. The colourway is Norway Spruce, and it is this stunningly beautiful tealy green with sort of variegation and flex, and it is one of my absolute favourites. These colours with the sort of heavily tonal, almost variegated colour were really what drew me to Madeline Tosh in the first place, and to this day this is still one of my favourite colourways of Tosh yarn. So yeah, I really love it. I bought this yarn from Loop, which is a yarn store here in London. It was, I think, possibly a bit of a present to myself towards the end of the year, and certainly when it came to casting on with it, I absolutely loved working with it. There are a few things, which is to say that I did not alternate skeins, and so when I stood up you may have seen that there is a little bit of a line. Let me just point it out to you as I want to do. There is a little bit of a line here between two different skeins where, you know, it may well have been the same dye lot, it may not have been the same dye lot. It's hand-dyed yarn, so ultimately dye lots don't really apply, but yes, you can see that there is a bit of difference here between the two. Different lighting tends to make it... Different lighting tends to make it more or less prominent, but it is definitely there, and this was before I really knew or understood much about alternating skeins, particularly when it came to working on larger projects. So, you know, I took my learnings and I worked with them going forward, but for the most part, I don't really notice it. And what I will say about this sweater though is, in terms of the fit, this is definitely a little bit more negative ease than the designer Vanessa recommends. So I actually ended up knitting, this is the size 48 in order to get a size 41. So I will say that my bust size when I knit this was a little bit smaller than it is just now. And so I was certainly hoping to get something closer to a 40 or 41 inch bust, but my gauge, being what it was, meant that I ended up knitting a slightly larger size, because even back then, even with a very early sweater, apparently I still wasn't too scared to just say bugger it to swatching and just go with what seemed right. So, you know, swings and roundabouts, but essentially I'm kind of impressed that it still fits okay. It's definitely snugger than I would like it to be. It's not necessarily at this point in time going to be a staple within my wardrobe. I am wearing it today because I'm getting toward the end of my sweaters that you haven't already seen here on the podcast. There are a few still to go, but some of them are sort of lighter weight, so I'm saving them for slightly warmer weather. This is definitely one of the cozier ones because it is quite dense with this gauge, and for all that there is the kind of lacy panel here at the front, which I will talk about in a second, it is a very, very cozy sweater. So on to the lace panel, I cocked it up. So there was a point when I realised that I had separated for the sleeves. I was knitting down. I looked back up and realised that at some point in the lace I had just made a bit of a balls up, and I'm proud to say that I can't actually now spot it. I'm sure I could if I sat and I stared at it, and probably not when it was still on my boobs, but actually lying flat on like my bed or a surface or something, I could probably find where I made the mistake, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I had carried on knitting for a little bit, looked up, realised I'd made the mistake, and decided that what I was going to do, because I was feeling confident, was I was going to take my circular needle, I was going to kind of get either ends of the circular needle either side of the panel that I wanted to rectify. I was going to take a DPN and I was going to drop back row by row very, very, very slowly. And there was a lot of trial and error involved, and there was also an awful lot of swearing involved, and you know, it took some time, but I did manage to sort it in the end. It's definitely not perfect. It is a little bit of a botch, but it's enough that it doesn't look as quite as prominent as it would have done if I'd left it alone altogether. So to that end, I am pretty proud with what I was able to do. Now, could I have gone all the way back and done it again? Of course I could, but this was a bit of a labour of love. It took me a while, and I say I knit it from December to January, and that doesn't necessarily seem like a while, but this is pretty much, I think, all I did in Twixtmas that year. I'm pretty sure there was some snacking and some cheese, because we've established that that is a staple of Twixtmas, but beyond that, I'm pretty sure my kind of heart was fairly dedicated to getting this done. So you know, I didn't necessarily want to give up all that hard work, but I still wanted it to look pretty much right. I've just double checked my notes over on the Ravelry page. Apparently, when I say that I dropped back a few rows, apparently I dropped back 86 rows. Wow. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've blocked a lot of that from my memory now. You know the way that they talk about in terms of things like, you know, really harrowing experiences like childbirth. Your memory is programmed to kind of forget the really awful moments. I feel like that's what I've done in my own head. I didn't realise it was quite that many, but there we have it. So yes, there is a little bit more information about this over on my project page should you wish to take a look. I used, I think, just over 5 skeins, I think 5.2 skeins, something along those lines. And I know that Tosh DK has a kind of slightly lower yardage than DK Twist. I think DK Twist is 250 yards and Tosh DK is 225. But yeah, even so, just under, or just over rather, kind of 5 skeins of yarn is not too shabby at all. And so yes, broadly speaking, I'm pretty happy with this. The sleeves are a little bit shorter than I had originally intended. Part of that is obviously the fit and the fact that I am a little bit larger around the bust when it comes to wearing it. It also means that the raglan sleeves fit me slightly differently. So in the past, this would have sat a little bit lower, with my chest measurement being a little bit smaller, and the sleeves as such would have come a little bit further down my arms. As it is, they are bracelet length just now, and while it's not ideal, it still kind of works. So I'm not going to kick this out of bed. I still really like wearing it, albeit it's probably a little bit more around the house sweater for now, but you never know, at some point I might be wearing this out and about and proud. And so there you have it, my Julissa sweater. Now, as I mentioned, there are no FOs this week, and so I'm going to go straight along into whips. The first 2 things that I'm working on won't be much of a surprise to you. They are projects that have featured rather heavily in recent weeks, and so I'm not going to spend too much time going over them again this week, but the first of them is living in my mica bag here, which was a gift from a fabulous friend of mine at Christmas in my lovely local knit group. And the first of those works in progress is my Lakeland pullover. Lakeland is a sweater that's designed by Fiona Alice. It was in issue 4 of Lane magazine, and it is a beautiful, slightly oversized sweater with this fabulous textured front and a lovely, nice, cozy high neck there as well, or sort of, I don't know if it's a true turtleneck or if it's more of kind of high cowl, but certainly a lovely cozy colour in there too. And here I am with it now. Now this may not look like a huge amount of progress, and in all truth it isn't ginormous, but what I have done, which you might not quite be able to see, is I have now split the front and the back. So I'm currently working the front panel on its own, and there's a good few inches to go of this along with some armhole shaping, but it is back and forth. The pattern repeat is making that rather straightforward. It is a really nice, soothing and simple repeat to knit. And yes, it is going pretty well. The yarn, as I've mentioned in previous weeks, in fact let me just show you the back of it so you can see, it is not textured on the back, but there is this kind of central stitch here in the middle, which when blocked will look a little bit more prominent, and the ribbing with the split hem at the back with the affectionately known butt flap. So I don't think that's probably the design detail of what the sort of term that was used as that design detail, but it's what I affectionately refer to it as over here. So this is being knit out of some beautiful, beautiful stash yarn that I had, which is Quince & Co. Lark, their worsted base, which is 100% wool, and it's beautifully soft and squishy. It is non-superwash, and therefore this is obviously not going to go within too close a distance of my washing machine, but it is in the Caspian colourway, which is a beautiful kind of biscuity beige colour. It's not brown, it's a beautiful biscuity taupey colour, and I really, really enjoy it. It's a beautiful neutral with just a little bit of kind of tonality to it to keep it interesting, and it's a colour of Quince & Co.'s that I absolutely adore. Let me hold it up so you can see a little bit more detail. And that's it there. And in terms of the texture on the front, you can see, so it's really, really lovely. Very, very soothing to knit. Hello. And yeah, just really enjoying it so far. So the needles I'm using are my Chowgu needles. I use Chowgu needles for pretty much everything garment related, and I'm knitting this on a size 5mm, which is a US size 8. Pretty much everything else I have talked about in recent weeks. I am hoping to continue to plug away on this. I'm hoping to have this sweater ready for EYF because I think it will be big and cozy. But if previous years are anything to go by, I say previous years like I've been there all the time. I went once last year. But if last year was anything to go by, actually inside the venue itself, it can get pretty toasty. So I do need to have a bit of a serious think about what knitwear I'm going to be taking and wearing while I'm there, because outside is fucking cold sometimes. Last year I ended up queuing to get into the venue on certainly the Saturday. I don't think no, sorry, I queued on the Friday to get in, and the cold and the biting wind of my youth really made itself known all over again. And so yeah, it's definitely worth having some nice sturdy knitwear for when you're out and about in the city, but inside the venue itself it is a little bit less necessary, if not indeed flat out unwelcome. So yeah, I'm hoping to have this done to keep me cozy, at least when I'm wandering around the town. The other thing I've been working on is living again in my Anne Catton bag. This is a bag I picked up at, gosh, I'm having a complete mental abstraction. Yarnporium. Oh crumbs, it really has been a while. This is a bag that I picked up at Yarnporium in November last year with, yeah, a fabulous day out, really enjoyed it. Managed to avoid doing too much damage on the yarn front. In fact, I don't think I bought any yarn, but then given I was about a week back from Rhinebeck at that point, that shouldn't be too surprising. But in here I'm continuing to work on a fabulous test knit for a friend of mine. That is the Candy Dot Hat in the wonderful, wonderful yarns from Madeline Tosh. But I'll put a picture of my wonderful friend Yelena Dasher. It's her test knit up here. She posted about it over on Instagram a couple of weeks ago now, and I commented saying, yes, please, me, please, I would like to knit this for you, because not only is it a beautiful design and one of my friends that I'm delighted to support. Let me hold it here so you can see it. Oh, it's so pretty. It is a really stunning pattern. It has cables, it has texture, and it has mohair. And yeah, I'm definitely enjoying working on this. Mohair is something I have a lot of love for at the moment. Yeah, it's such a delight. The yarns that I am using, as I've mentioned in previous weeks, I have, oh, let me figure out what I'm doing here, some mohair silk, which is this beauteousness. Let me focus the camera so you can appreciate it. This is mohair silk from Stranded Dye Works, my wonderful friend Amy Florence, in her Pigeon Fancier colourway. It is a beautiful blend of silk and kid mohair, and it is deliciously soft and beautifully tonally coloured. And I'm holding it together with this wondrousness, which is some vintage Madeline Tosh stash in her 80-10-10 fingering weight base in the Tidal Basin colourway. And this, I mean, the two of them together are stunning. Amy's colours, of course, are stunning, but this is possibly one of my favourite Tosh colourways of all time. It is, as I say, Tidal Basin is not a colour that she dyes regularly at the moment. I always live in hope that she will bring it back, but it is a fabulous tealy green, not hugely dissimilar actually from, let me bring you back, hello, it's in the same kind of wheelhouse, right? It's definitely, I mean, obviously Norway spruce is a little bit darker, a little bit greener. This is a little bit more of your kind of true turquoisey teal colour. But yeah, I mean, you can tell, I'm a sucker for them. But yes, this is a really beautiful colourway, and I'm enjoying knitting with it. So I am hopeful. I'm a couple of chart repeats in. I've got at least one more to do before I work on the decreases. I might add in another depending on how I'm feeling about the length, although I think this is looking pretty good. At the moment this is still a test knit. Yelena hasn't published the pattern just yet, but when she does I will be sure to let you know, because this is definitely a hat that I think many of you will enjoy knitting. And if nothing else, if you happen to win one of the prizes for the Blamed Under Knit Along, which I showed off earlier with the yarns, then this could be a wonderful alternative for the sparkling slider hat if you've already made one of those. So yes, do I dare try it on? I dare try it on. Because what is life without a little bit of risk and things coming off needles? Oh, but look at it though. Oh, I love it so much. Seriously. Ugh, this is going to be amazing. Right, I don't think I need to do that additional round of the chart. I think at the end of the next one that I need to do, I will start some decreases and I will be good to go. And I love this already. This has been my commute knitting, so if you have heard tale of a rogue knitter on the London Underground at approximately 7:45 in the morning who is, you know, intently staring at her work, really trying too hard not to be sort of jostled and put off by people around her, and who has on occasion had to stare out people who have been, you know, pointedly looking and being a little bit dismissive of some of the work that she's been doing, that might be me. So I do knit on the tube. I don't have a thing about it. I knit pretty much anywhere, in all honesty, and don't have a thing about it. I know that reactions range from people who've sat and had conversations with me about it, who are either knitters, were knitters, have parents who were knitters, and so we have a bit of a chat about what I'm doing and how I got into it. I've had people ignore it. I've had people see it and then move somewhere else in the carriage. That has happened once or twice. I did feel like turning around to them and explaining that it was okay and it wasn't contagious, but there is genuinely no accounting for some people. I've had people look at it and just be a bit funny and weirded out by it and just be a little bit dismissive. I've had people try to film it and take pictures of it, and I will confess that dependent on my mood I either let it slide, or if they're being a bit obnoxious about it I do stop knitting and look at them until they've put the phone away. So it just varies, but for the most part I really enjoy knitting, and frankly my commute is one of the few times that I'm able to dedicate a big chunk of time to getting some knitting done. I have about half an hour when I'm sitting on the tube each way during the morning and the afternoon, and so if I can get a little bit more done on this I'm always delighted to do so. So yes, hence my progress on my test knit of the Candy Dot hat for my wonderful friend Yelena. And now all the statics come out to play. This is fun. I have enough static to charge at least a small holding somewhere. It's intense. I mentioned in previous weeks that I've been continuing to put some work into my granny stripe crochet blanket as well, and I've been continuing to work in some of the minis that I had as part of my advent calendar that was featured over in Vlogmas. So Vlogmas I was showing on a daily basis throughout the month of December leading up to Christmas itself, where I was opening some of the advent calendars, the yarny advent calendars that I had, and one of those was a calendar from a homespun house who is Molly, who is now back in the US but was previously based over in Berlin in Germany, and I had bought an advent calendar of her the year prior, so back in 2017, which had taken a very roundabout trip through a number of different post offices and delivery depots to get to me, and in the end made it into my grabby little hands around about February or May I think of 2018. Now I wasn't really in a place where I wanted to work on my granny stripe right then, and so I put it to one side and realised as I started Vlogmas last year in 2018 that I had a whole other advent calendar to run into the bargain. So I decided that that was going to be the first advent calendar that I worked up into my crochet blanket, and I've now managed to work in all 24 days worth. So let me see if there is any way whatsoever I can hold this up for you to see the beast that is this crochet blanket, because it is getting pretty lengthy. So I have to hold this sideways for you to see, but this is where I started. So I've got my foundation row that I started back in December of 2017, and then I have yarns from my Nora George advent calendar that I had back in that year as well. And so that goes from, it's not the foundation row, it's the kind of pink immediately above the foundation row, all the way up to this fabulous reddish pink here. Those are the first 24 days of my advent calendar with Nora George. I then have 12 rows, or I say rows, they're all kind of double rows because I'm doing one row in each direction, so 2 rows. I don't know terminology for crochet, I very much just do the moves. Yeah, that's all I've got. But I am doing so 2 rows in each colour, so one in one direction and then one's back, and I have here kind of 12 of those in colours and yarns that I finished working with throughout last year. So I did a little bit of work on it last year, but then really it's been this section here that's been done the most recently. So from this variegated black colourway all the way up, these are the mini skeins that I've been using from my Homespun House advent calendar, starting with this green, yellowy, sort of blue colour all the way up. And I think I mentioned, I can't remember if it was on Vlogmas or if it was over here on this channel. Let me see if there's any way that I can hold it. There we go. That's attractive. So I was mentioning that there was this kind of section in the middle, which I'm going to point out with my nose because I'm now out of hand. Here. I'm so professional. Yeah, this kind of section that's roughly in line with my nose, I wasn't mad keen on. So one of the things with advent calendars is obviously when you take them out of the packets, I say take them out of the packets like you know what I'm talking about. One second. So each day with Molly's advent calendar I would receive a little bag like this with a number on it, and in it would be a little mini skein all skeined up. Now I'm crinkling. Here is the leftover. This is day 23, so this is one of the days towards the end. It's very pretty, it's very sparkly. But I was working these up in the blanket in the order in which I opened them, and therefore there is a degree of randomness to it, if you like. And so that means that in working them up, I do have some colours that are very kind of similar, and then patches like this, they're a little bit darker and moodier, and then some areas up here at the top that are almost kind of 80s in their neonness. And yeah, I do like if I'd been doing this kind of with purpose, designing it, or at least kind of choosing the colours as I go, I would have been a little bit more prescriptive with how these worked up. But as it is, do you know what? It's absolutely fine, because this is an advent calendar and I can rationalise that in my own mind and say, yes, that's probably not what you would have chosen, but hey, these are the colours in the order that they came out of the advent calendar, and so do you know what, I can live with it. It's not a problem at all. But yes, certainly when it comes to sort of sections like this where I've chosen the colours quite purposefully, you can see that there is a little bit of a difference. And even in the kind of Nora George section here towards the bottom, there are some days where the kind of the sort of colour values were very similar, so at a glance they're maybe a little bit difficult to see in terms of the distinctions, but all in all, it's a blooming blanket, right? I don't need it to be an absolute masterpiece of colour theory. I can live. So yeah, but we're getting there. In terms of kind of overall length, it's basically full wingspan right now, and I want to say it's maybe slightly over halfway. Am I going to use this as a blanket on a bed? Possibly not, but I'd like to have the option of doing so just in case. This is probably going to be something that I chuck on or overmeet downstairs when I'm sitting watching telly in the evenings. It's probably something that the cat is going to have his wicked clawing way with as well. So, you know, I'm not hugely precious about it. but it is also a wonderful memento of working with some truly fabulous yarns from some dyers that I really enjoy using, and not to say dyers that I enjoy using, dyers who make yarn that I enjoy using. Sorry, Tracy. But yeah, I've really enjoyed working these up. And yeah, in terms of the next kind of few skeins and things to work with, obviously I have my Advent minis from my Nora George calendar again this year, but they are the most beautiful sort of fade gradient, and so I'm still having a think about what I want to use those for. They're probably not going to go into here because they're in such a fabulous order that I want them to be a kind of special thing in and of itself. So still thinking about that. There's also the Cat Sandwich Fibres Advent skeins that I opened, which are stunningly beautiful. Some of them are what I think we'd call sort of micro striping skeins. So there are kind of long stretches of a darker colour and then a lighter one, or at least a bit of difference between the two. It's kind of similar to what I have here with this black variegated skein. So the black fades into grey, fades into black, fades into grey, and what I would say is the kind of effect that it gives in the blanket is fine, but it would show up really beautifully if it was knit into something like socks. So the Cat Sandwich Fibre skeins, I'm still again having a bit of a think about. I'm sort of tempted maybe to do some scrappy socks with them instead, but we shall see. But the good news is I am not short of minis. I have, between leftovers from projects that I've worked on in the past, between packages and swaps that I've done with friends, which have had a few minis involved, between, frankly, mini bundles that I've bought on a whim, I have more than enough yarn to keep me going. And so it's not going to be a kind of intense 1-2 rows every day, which is what I was doing throughout the most of December, up until I think the last few days when I got a little bit sidetracked. I do intend to kind of pick this up as and when, probably not quite as frequently as it has been up until now. But yeah, I really enjoy working on this. It's very meditative, it's lovely. So there we go. The last thing I want to talk to you about in this section is a little bit of blurring of boundaries. So usually I talk through my works in progress and then move on to vicarious knitting, and that is where I start to share a little bit more around patterns that have caught my eye, maybe some yarn, maybe some stash enhancement, maybe some publications that are new to me, and just generally have a bit of a chat with you about the things that are going on in the knitting community at that point in time. But it definitely makes sense to blur the boundaries a little bit on that this week, because I do want to talk to you about some of the discussions that have been coming up in the crafting community, and while those are front of mind for many of us, and indeed in some instances have been front of mind for a much longer period of time, I would like to take a little bit of time to talk with you about diversity in the crafting community. So this is a pretty emotive topic, but when it comes to the crafting community at large, it can be an incredible comfort. The act of making in and of itself is something that I think anyone can take a huge degree of solace from, particularly when day-to-day life and things around us are just becoming a little bit much and getting a little bit out of hand. It's wonderful to be able to focus in on something and feel as though we're being productive and we're creating something that we really enjoy. And then when it comes to transferring that and finding other people who do something similar, that's when we start to look outside ourselves and build up and take part in this incredible community. And I think when it comes to sharing ideas and building friendships and ultimately escaping a little bit through that community, it's definitely something that I personally have taken a huge amount of comfort from. But that comfort isn't necessarily felt equally. Not everyone receives that same degree of warmth or welcome from the crafting community at large, and certainly based on some of the discussions that I've seen over on Instagram in recent weeks, that is part of what's been really coming to the fore. But if you're not on Instagram, or indeed you're not totally sure what it is that I'm referring to, I would highly recommend you head over to Ravelry and take a look at the Needlework News and Events forum. So this is one of the big 6 forums, which essentially just means that when you join Ravelry for the first time, you're automatically added into this. So if you go to your forum page on the site, it should be there if you haven't moved it elsewhere, for instance. But in there is a topic called racism and inclusion in the knitting community, and I would recommend that you have a look through some of the contents there. This is a thread that's been put together by Casey, who is one of the co-founders of Ravelry, to cover off not only a bit of an introduction and some context to what sparked the debate, but also it references some of the key voices that have been kind of crucial in bringing the debate to the fore, and those makers include Ocean by the Sea, The Colour Mustard, Sukrita, and of course A Stitch to Wear, as well as linking to a number of different resources. And so if you are unfamiliar or you're just a little bit unsure of the context of some of these discussions, I would recommend that as a starting point. You don't need to have an Instagram account, you'll be able to follow along without one, but I'm not going to summarise the kind of background, the context over here, partly because I believe that Casey and some of the other contributors to that thread have done an infinitely better, more complete, robust job than I could ever hope to over here, but also because I believe it's important for us each to go through it on our own and reflect and consider what it means to us as we go. There are some hard-hitting topics in this, like privilege and bias and racism, that cannot be summarised or circumvented, and it's only really by starting to go through and unpick some of that and what it means for us personally that we're really starting to do some of that work. And it's not comfortable. I'm not a finished product. I want to start right up by saying that this is not me kind of preaching from the other side, not remotely. I have been really kind of shaken this week as I look through and examine some of the reactions that I had, some of the thoughts that I've had, some of the ways in which I have responded to things where, or at least thought to respond to things, where I've taken a step back, considered it, and really started to bring in some of the thoughts around privilege and bias and, yes, even racism. So racism is a really emotive term, and I do not use it carelessly. There have been a lot of discussions around it in recent days, and there can be a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the word racism because there's almost this kind of feeling that in order to be racist you need to be malicious or willfully dismissive in your actions or your words, and that, you know, if your intent is different then you can't possibly be responsible or accused of racism. And it's a difficult one because it is defined in very different ways, but if we concentrate for a moment on this idea of systemic racism or systematic racism, depending on the terms that you choose to use, those are ways of defining racism that require not only this idea of prejudice, but also the idea of power. And so actually when it comes to talking about communities or systems or, you know, countries that are built and run predominantly by one race, in this instance, let's talk about white people, then there is a risk that in building those communities and surrounding themselves with familiar things and creating ideals and desired ways of being, that you can also start to marginalise and discriminate and ultimately exclude people that don't necessarily fit the mould. And that is when you start to see racism being used as a term to describe the way that those communities ultimately proceed, by excluding those or marginalising or just dismissing those people who don't necessarily fit in a certain way. Now, I want to be very clear up front that in using terms like you or your, I'm not addressing or accusing anyone specifically. In terms of privilege or bias or any of those things, only you know where you're at with this, and you are not accountable to me. That is not what I'm trying to get across here, but rather to talk a little bit more broadly about the challenges that are facing the community, the discussions that we've been having, and what that means for us as individuals as well as the community at large. So, taking into account that definition of systematic racism, meaning that you have systems, communities, structures, countries that have been built with one particular group of people in mind, in this instance white people who have espoused all of these ideals and surrounded themselves with people that look familiar and who have the same values as they do, you kind of have to say that the knitting community is racist. If you look at the people who have shaped it, if you look at the publications, some of the authors, some of the I guess kind of the ideals that we have and the things that we aspire to within knitting, overwhelmingly this is a very white space. Now that is not to say that any single one of those individuals, of those people responsible for it, are willfully racist or destructive or malicious, but rather that in building up a community that values all of these things that are quite inherently white things, that it systematically also devalues some of the things that don't fit that mold. And that kind of realization is part of what has made this discussion so uncomfortable, is that people who consider themselves to be allies, people who consider themselves to be incredibly clued up on exactly these sorts of things, didn't necessarily recognize or take action or, you know, kind of really even see that this was quite so entrenched as it's proving to be. And if you are looking for evidence, albeit anecdotal, there are some incredibly powerful and quite harrowing stories over on Sukrita and the Petite Knitters Instagram stories. Now, this is on Instagram, but there are stories being shared by people of colour about instances where they have been routinely dismissed or overlooked or outright harassed, whether it be in online communities or in small local gatherings like knit nights, large-scale events, local yarn shops, the experiences that they've had, and how really it's kind of brought to the fore the fact that they don't necessarily feel that they do belong in this idealized community that we seem to think exists. And this is not a time to turn around to look at one of those isolated things and say, oh, well, that's happened to me as well, so what about me? This is not the time for that, because these are not isolated events. The whole purpose in pulling these stories out is to say, look at how many people are experiencing these things within the community. They are being routinely overlooked, and that is a problem. You could take a look at some of the discussions that are being had and say, well, hang on now, what about size or gender or sexuality or disability, for instance? And absolutely, when it comes to building a truly diverse and representative community that reflects the people who are taking part in it, then absolutely these are all things that have to be considered. However, there is a risk in handling all of these things at once, that when it comes to looking at the issues that we've been talking around, specifically around people of colour, around white privilege, that when it comes to the work that needs to be done to really unpick some of the privilege and bias that we have at our own personal level, that having discussions around intersectionalism can risk diversing the conversation to one that is a little bit more closely akin to what about me? And so as someone who is clearly white and could never identify as anything but white, I can sit here and really kind of introspect and seriously examine some of the privileges, the biases that I have, because they pertain to this conversation of a white community and how it has handled and, you know, really kind of overlooked people of colour. if you start to bring intersectionalism into it too early, then I as an individual, you know, there's a lot of things for me to contend with. I have to think about kind of my privileges versus, you know, one particular group. I then think about, well, hang on, what does that mean for me in terms of someone who is, you know, certainly not slim in this group, and what does that mean for me? And there's just then an awful lot to consider. And so absolutely, intersectionalism, creating a truly diverse and representative community, is where we are all striving to get to, because I think it benefits everybody. The challenge is in how best to do it, and in doing it gradually, because this is not a debate or a discussion that deserves to be distracted with what about me's. This is not a debate that is about me or you or Caitlin Hunter or Andrea Mowry or you know, Casey and Jess at Ravelry. It's not about Gigi. It's not about individuals within this community and whether or not they are representative as a whole. It is about ensuring that we are building a community that is more inclusive of people of colour, with the ultimate goal of being more representative of everyone that is part of this community. And so if in hearing or reading any of this, your first instinct has been, well, hang on, I don't agree with that because me personally, what about me? I urge you to stop and to pause and to sit with that for a minute and really kind of examine where it is that is coming from. Again, I say all of this as someone who is doing this on a very regular basis, daily. At one point, I'm pretty sure it was hourly, if not even more frequently than that. And it's really just by sitting back and kind of thinking through, hang on, my response to that was this, where is that coming from? What is the kind of perspective that I'm bringing to this, and how could that be different from some of the others that I'm reading and taking into account? Because it's only really by starting to unpick that we start to get to the root of what's been driving it forward. I think that is what's meant by this phrase, doing the work. And it is work. It is hard, and from what little I have done so far, and there is so much more to do, I can say firsthand, it sucks. Essentially, to me, it comes down to, if we want to be better allies, if we want to create a better community that is more inclusive, really it's that kind of tolerance and listening and, frankly, empathy that is going to take some of this discussion forward. And for me personally, when it comes to starting to examine some of my own privilege and start to do some of that work, well, fuck me if there isn't quite a bit of it to get started from. I was not short of starting points, let me tell you. I mean, I'm being flippant, but I am unashamedly here a work in progress, and in going through and starting to examine things like, you know, my upbringing. So I was incredibly privileged in that I was brought up by my mother and my grandmother, who loved me, who supported me, who sacrificed a huge amount for my education and, you know, sometimes for my entertainment. That I was in school and an education system that valued me, that nurtured me, that really pushed me when I needed to be pushed, that, you know, kind of supported me on an individual level and helped me to really kind of understand and make the most of the potential that I had, and that in going into higher education and into employment, that I was able to develop expertise and experience and you know, kind of desirable qualities that allowed me to take advantage of the opportunities that came my way, and essentially brought me to a point where right now I am in a job that I really enjoy, that I'm well compensated for, and all of which allows me to live really pretty comfortably. And so, you know, Jesus, if that isn't a huge amount of privilege. And yes, I went through a divorce, but my circumstances were such that I was able to make some pretty positive and sweeping changes to be in a better position both physically and mentally off the back of it. And this is not a question of entitlement. None of this is things that I feel that I deserve. These are things that, through my set of circumstances, the huge amount of privilege that I've had in my life to date, the choices that I have made and the people that I've surrounded by have brought me to where I am right now. And it's something that I am, off the back of this week, even more grateful for than I had been in the run up to this conversation. So that's just a little bit of my personal reflection. I'm going to stop there because, one, it's not all about me, and two, I want to touch on a little bit of what I feel that this means for the podcast, and again how we here specifically at Knitting Vicariously begin to take this forward. So in starting Knitting Vicariously, my intention was always to create this kind of podcast and platform that hinged on this idea of sharing inspiration and excitement and enthusiasm for things that were just coming from all different areas of the community as a whole. But the notion of sharing ideas and inspiration is something that feels as though it can be pretty universal and inclusive. And so I want to make it very, very clear that my aim here with Knitting Vicariously is to create a space that is safe and inclusive for everyone, particularly those whose voices have been harder to hear in the past. Now, this is not about pushing a certain liberal agenda. This is not about favouring a certain perspective. This is not about creating a superficial conversation for people. This is about ensuring the conversations that we are having are supportive and encouraging, and basically just ones that allow us as a community to grow and to move forward. So this does mean that both I and our fabulous chief pickle moderator, Yelena, are going to be keeping a little bit more of a close eye on the threads and the comment section in the next few days. And if there is anything that you take issue with here, if you disagree with any of the points that I've raised, if there's something you want to call out or question, or even just discuss in a little bit more detail, then you are, of course, more than welcome to contact me privately. I would recommend either on Ravelry, messaging me over there, or indeed using the contact email address that's listed here on YouTube. I think it is contact@knittingvicariously.com. I cannot promise you a speedy response. I want to be very transparent about that, but at the very least I will take and look and go through the messages that you send, because the main thing here is that it keeps them private. If you are concerned about something and you don't necessarily want to speak it aloud, or if you want to pick anything up with me directly, because all of this has been my take on something that has been happening across the community as a whole, then you are more than welcome to pick it up with me there. But if you just straight up don't want to hear any of this, don't want to engage with it, don't believe this is a conversation we should be having, or indeed just don't want to be burdened with any of it and go back to the way that things were before, please feel free to not leave a comment either here on YouTube or indeed elsewhere on the Knitting Vicariously platform. There is a very strong chance that your comment will be moderated anyway. And if you do really, really want to make your feelings known, then by all means use the thumbs down immediately below this video over on YouTube to do exactly that. I am someone who I want to do more in this space. I want to be more inclusive, and I want this platform to be representative of the fabulous group of individuals who make up this wonderful space in the community. And it doesn't really sound like you're someone who wants to be part of that. So as I say, feel free to use the thumbs down to signify your feelings as you head through the door on your way out. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to be more considered in your responses, to engage with people constructively, to start to think about how we can do more to build this platform and this community into something that is more inclusive, that is more representative of this fabulous community as a whole, you are very, very welcome. And I really appreciate you being here. But now that I have essentially talked myself hoarse in all of this, you can tell I'm not used to podcasting anymore. My voice is just about gone. It is really the perfect time for me to hand over to you and to showcase some of the incredible things that you've continued to work on as part of our ongoing knit along. So without any further ado, I am going to go straight in to the fabulousness that is our calorie. And so there you have it. As you will have seen, this week was a Ravelry week. I have been showcasing and featuring projects that you've been working on over on Ravelry, whether it be in the chatter thread or indeed the FO thread, and there are just some absolute stunners to choose from. Thank you again for continuing to make it such a fabulous, fabulous destination to go and stop in and see some of the things that you have been working on. I hope that if there are any things you want to finish in the coming days, that you have ample time to do that, and if not, well, you know, there's always time to cast on a few more things. I'm just saying. That is pretty much it for this week. As ever, I am so delighted that you've joined me, whether it be for the first time or whether it indeed be for the 15th time. I'm not including Vlogmas. That's maths that I can't do at the drop of a hat. But either way, I'm delighted that you are here. And yes, as ever, show notes can be found over on Ravelry in the Knitting Vicariously podcast group. There will be an episode specific thread for exactly this episode. You will also find show notes over on Instagram with the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account, where you can see some of the makers and the hashtags that are relevant to this week's episode. I will be back in a couple of weeks' time. If you are looking for something to fill the void, if you like, in between, then of course please do take a look at some of the podcasts I mentioned up front in this week's episode, but also feel free to pop back to some of the previous episodes and show notes and check out some of the podcasts mentioned there too. There are some truly fabulous makers, crafters, dyers, just amazing individuals out there, and I hope you get to enjoy and spend a little bit of time with them too. But with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, but if for whatever reason it isn't, I hope you have the opportunity to knit vicariously. A little bit of keep on keeping on, but also let's make sure that we are making the changes as and when. And I really look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye. And so if I just hold it so you can see this section here, I say so you can see, I have no idea what you can see. In theory, I tell you what, if I can look through this. But now I just worry that you can see my face and my little nose peeking through. Hello. Oh my god. But yeah, so you can see this area here just to where... What am I doing? It's fine, we're cracking on. It's good, it's fine, it's good. How are you? How are you? You okay? I mean, I'm swell, but... Do you know what makes it extra specially awesome in trying to have a genuinely quite serious conversation with yourself in a room in front of a camera? Is the advent of a plane going overhead every 45 seconds. That is really super helpful. Having to stop and pause and wait for it to pass. It's, you know, it punctuates the points very successfully, I feel. Fuck's sake. And now every time I take a drink on the podcast, given in the past I've joked about this being gin, I think of Drunk Knitter, because there is a strong chance that this would be a much more fun podcast if this genuinely were completely full of gin. But, you know, the long-term health effects, both in terms of, you know, actual physical health and to a lesser extent reputationally, I mean, it'd be interesting.